Lady Whitmore had been warned 3 times before she ever set foot in Ashford Hall. The coachman warned her first, refusing to carry her bags past the gate. "No governess lasts a fortnight here, miss. The last one left in the night. Didn't even collect her wages." The housekeeper warned her second, meeting her in the entrance hall with a face drawn tight as a curtain string. "Lady Seraphina does not want a companion," Clara Hastings said quietly. "She has made that very clear. To the last 4. And Lord Pembroke warned her third, smiling as he said it, which somehow made it worse. "You seem a sensible woman, Miss Whitmore. Sensible women don't stay." She had smiled back and said nothing, because she had already decided she would stay exactly as long as she pleased, and not 1 day less. Then she met Lady Seraphina Ashford. The young woman stood at the top of the grand staircase, dressed in unrelieved black though her mother had been dead 7 years, her dark eyes assessing Whitmore the way a general assesses an enemy's weakest flank. "So they've sent another one," Seraphina said, not moving. "Tell me, how much are you being paid to pretend you can manage me?" Every servant in the hall went very still, waiting for the newcomer to falter, to apologize, to shrink. Lady Whitmore climbed the last 3 steps, stopped an arm's length away, and looked her employer's daughter directly in the eye. "I wasn't hired to manage you," she said evenly. "And I don't intend to pretend anything. If you'd like to know how long I'll stay, Lady Seraphina, that depends entirely on how long you keep testing whether I'll run." Seraphina's expression flickered, surprise, quickly buried. No one in that house had ever told her no. That was about to change. Ashford Hall sat above the Cornish cliffs like something carved from the grey stone beneath it, beautiful, weathered, and cold in ways that had nothing to do with the wind coming off the sea. Whitmore had taken the position through an agency in London, drawn less by the wages than by the strange note attached to the listing, "Applicant must not be easily frightened." She had thought it a joke until she arrived. Her room was in the east wing, plain and clean, with a window overlooking the cliff path. Clara Hastings brought her tea that first evening and lingered in the doorway, twisting her apron in her hands. "You mustn't think ill of her," Clara said finally. "She wasn't always like this." "What was she like?" "Warm. Funny, even." Clara's eyes went distant. "Before her mother died." "Before," she stopped herself, glancing toward the corridor as though the walls might carry the words back to someone who shouldn't hear them. "It isn't my place." "Whose place is it, then?" Clara didn't answer that either. She only said, "The Duke keeps to his study most days. Grief took the rest of him along with her ladyship. He loves his daughter, I don't doubt that for a moment, but he can't look at her without seeing her mother's face, and Lady Seraphina knows it. I think that's half of why she's become what she's become. Nobody looks at her and simply sees her." That night, Whitmore lay awake listening to the sea and thought about a young woman who had lost her mother and, in every meaningful sense, her father as well, left instead in the care of an estate full of people too frightened to correct her and one smiling cousin who seemed altogether too comfortable with the arrangement. Lord Pembroke found her the next morning in the breakfast room, alone, pouring his own tea with the easy confidence of a man who considered the house half his already. "I hope Seraphina wasn't too trying yesterday," he said pleasantly. "She does frighten people. It's rather sad, really, nobody stays long enough to see past it. Perhaps no one has tried." "Oh, I've tried, Miss Whitmore. Believe me. Some people simply cannot be reached." He smiled over the rim of his cup. "You'll see soon enough. I'd hate to watch you exhaust yourself on a lost cause." There was something in the way he said it, too smooth, too rehearsed, that made her decide, quietly, that Lord Pembroke was a man worth watching rather than believing. Her first real test came within the hour, when Seraphina swept into the schoolroom Whitmore had begun to set in order and, without a word, appended a shelf of books onto the floor. "I don't want lessons," Seraphina said. "I want you gone." Whitmore knelt, unhurried, and began stacking the books. "That's unfortunate," she said, "because I'm not leaving." So you may as well pick up that one by your foot. It's got your mother's name written inside the cover, and I'd hate to see it torn. Seraphina froze. For the first time since Whitmore's arrival, she didn't have a cruel answer ready. The book was old, its spine cracked from use rather than neglect, a slim volume of Cornish folk poetry, inscribed on the flyleaf in a delicate hand, "To my darling Sarah, who will always be my brightest morning." Mother. Seraphina snatched it from the floor before Whitmore could hand it over, clutching it to her chest as though someone might try to take it from her. Then, seeming to catch herself in a moment of weakness, she straightened and said coldly, "You may go now." "I told you. I'm not going anywhere." "Everyone goes." "I'm not everyone." Seraphina's laugh was short and humorless. "No. You're simply the newest one who hasn't realized it yet." But she didn't append anything else that day. And the next morning, when Whitmore arrived in the schoolroom, the books had been res-tacked on their shelf, imperfectly, but res-tacked all the same. It became, over the following fortnight, a strange and halting rhythm. Seraphina tested her constantly, sharp remarks over breakfast, doors slammed with theatrical precision, one deliberately cruel comment about Whitmore's plain grey dresses that was clearly meant to wound. Whitmore refused each time to either collapse or retaliate. She simply held her ground, calm and immovable as the cliffs outside the window, and said no when no was warranted, and meant it kindly when kindness was warranted too. It was Duke Ashford she saw far less of. He kept to his study, as Clara had said, emerging mostly at dusk to walk the cliff path alone, his shoulders bowed under some weight Whitmore had not yet named. When their paths crossed in the corridor one evening, he looked at her with faint, weary surprise, as if startled to find her still in his house. "You've lasted longer than the others," he said. "I intend to last longer still, Your Grace." Something shifted behind his eyes, not quite hope, but its distant cousin. "She's not cruel by nature, my daughter. Whatever you've seen." "I don't doubt it." He nodded once and continued down the corridor, and Whitmore stood a moment longer, wondering what exactly had hollowed a grieving father so thoroughly that he couldn't bring himself to comfort the child he had left behind. It was Clara who handed her the first true thread to pull. Late one evening, dusting the study Whitmore wasn't meant to be tidying, she found a ledger half hidden beneath a stack of correspondence, the estate accounts, in Lord Pembroke's careful hand, showing withdrawals against the estate's tenant rents that didn't match any expenditure she could account for. 3 years of them. Growing larger each season. She said nothing to Clara. She said nothing to anyone. But she copied the dates and figures onto a scrap of paper before returning the ledger exactly as she'd found it. The following afternoon, Pembroke found her in the corridor outside the study, his smile a fraction too fixed. "You've been busy," he said lightly. "Clara mentioned you'd taken an interest in the household accounts." "Should I not have?" "Not at all. Only, some things are best left to those who understand them fully. The estate's finances are complicated. It would be a shame for a misunderstanding to cause trouble where none exists." It was not a threat. It was worse than a threat, it was a warning dressed as courtesy, and Whitmore recognized it instantly for what it was. She smiled and said nothing at all, and resolved, that same evening, to learn exactly what Lord Pembroke did not want understood. The truth, when it came, arrived through Seraphina herself, not through the ledgers, not through Clara's careful hints, but through the raw, unguarded grief of a young woman who had spent 7 years believing a lie no one had ever corrected. It happened on a night of rare storm, the wind driving rain against the cliffside windows hard enough to rattle the glass. Whitmore found Seraphina in the library long after the household had gone to bed, sitting on the floor before the cold hearth with a bundle of letters spread around her, her composure entirely gone. "You shouldn't be in here," Seraphina said, not looking up. Her voice had none of its usual sharpness. It sounded, instead, like a child's. "Neither should you, at this hour." Whitmore crossed the room and sat, without invitation, on the floor beside her. "What are those?" "My mother's letters." Seraphina's hand trembled over one in particular, the ink faded but the words still legible. Lord Pembroke gave me this one himself, the week after she died. He said I ought to have it, so I'd understand what happened. She held it out, and Whitmore read it in the flickering candlelight, a supposed letter from the late Duchess, written in a hand Whitmore did not recognize, confessing that her final illness had been worsened, perhaps caused, by the strain of a daughter too willful, too demanding, too much like her father's pride. I was 12 years old, Seraphina whispered. I believed I had killed her. I have believed it for 7 years. That's why father can't look at me, because he believes it too. Pembroke told him the same story. Whitmore's stomach turned cold. She had seen Pembroke's ledgers, his careful theft, his smiling patience, but this was crueler than any missing rent. This was a wound inflicted on purpose, sustained on purpose, so that a frightened, isolated girl would never think to question the man managing her family's fortune out from under her. May I look at this again? Whitmore asked, and Seraphina, drained past resistance, let her take it. Whitmore had spent enough evenings at the schoolroom desk beside Seraphina to know her mother's hand from the household portraits and old correspondence Clara had shown her, elegant, sloping letters, nothing like the cramped, deliberate script before her now. This was not the Duchess's writing at all. That was the moment everything changed. Seraphina. Whitmore kept her voice steady, though her pulse was racing. This isn't your mother's hand. Look at the letters your mother sent you as a child, the poetry book, remember? Compare them. Seraphina's eyes darted to the inscription she still carried pressed inside her sleeve, then back to the letter, and back again. Her face went white. It's not the same, she breathed. It's not, he told me, for 7 years he let me believe. I know. Why would he, and then, all at once, understanding arrived, brutal and clarifying. The accounts. He's been managing the estate since mother died, because father trusted no one else, because I was too consumed with grief and guilt to ever ask a single question about where the money went. Whitmore said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would soften what was already, plainly, true. Lord Pembroke had not merely exploited a grieving family. He had manufactured the grief that made the exploitation possible, isolating Seraphina behind a wall of guilt and cruelty precisely so no one, servant or daughter, would ever look too closely at his ledgers. Seraphina turned to her, eyes wet, voice raw with something that was not quite hope and not quite fury but both at once. You have to help me prove it, she said. Before he takes everything that's left. They moved carefully, aware that a single misstep could see Whitmore dismissed before the truth ever reached the Duke. Clara Hastings, once she understood what had been done to the girl she'd known since infancy, abandoned all caution. I've suspected something wasn't right for years, Clara admitted. The three of them gathered in the schoolroom long after the rest of the household slept. The tenant families have been grumbling about rents raised twice in as many winters, while the estate's income should have covered every repair twice over. I never had proof. I never had anyone to bring it to. You have someone now, Whitmore said. Between them they assembled what they could, the copied figures from the ledger, the forged letter with its mismatched hand, and, from Clara, the recollection of a locked drawer in Pembroke's own guest quarters that he never let the maids near. It was Seraphina who insisted on searching it herself. I have spent 7 years being frightened of my own house, she said, jaw set in a way that reminded Whitmore, for the first time, of a woman who might one day run an estate rather than merely inherit one. I am done being frightened. The drawer held correspondence between Pembroke and a solicitor in London, discreet, careful language that nonetheless made its meaning plain, discussions of transferring guardianship of the estate's finances more fully into Pembroke's control, citing Lady Seraphina's continued instability, and the Duke's diminished capacity for oversight as justification. A petition, half-drafted, to have Seraphina's inheritance placed entirely under her cousin's trusteeship the moment she came of age to receive it, on the grounds that she was unfit to manage it herself. Seraphina's hands shook as she read it. He was going to have me declared unfit. Using the very cruelty he encouraged in me as his proof. It was Duke Ashford who found them there, in the small hours, drawn by the light beneath the study door. He took in the scene, his daughter pale and shaking, Whitmore steady beside her, papers spread across the desk, and for the first time since Whitmore's arrival, something in his weary composure cracked entirely. "What is this?" Seraphina answered before Whitmore could soften it for him. "It's the truth, father. About mother. About what Pembroke told me. About what he's been doing to this family for 7 years while you couldn't bring yourself to look at me." The Duke read the forged letter with visibly shaking hands, and something old and terrible seemed to drain out of him as he understood what he had let happen, not merely the theft, but the years of silence that had let his daughter believe herself a murderer while he mourned a wife instead of raising the child left behind. "I should have asked," he said hoarsely. "I should have asked you what you believed. I let my grief blind me to yours." It was Pembroke's voice from the doorway that ended the moment. "I don't know what lies you've been fed," he said smoothly, though his eyes had gone flat and cold at the sight of the open drawer, "but I'd be careful, Seraphina, about trusting the word of a governess over family." "She's shown me nothing but the truth," Seraphina said. "Which is more than you ever did." Pembroke's composure held a moment longer. Then his gaze moved to the drawer, to the papers, to the ledger figures in Whitmore's careful hand, and something in his face confirmed, more thoroughly than any confession could, exactly how much he had to lose. He denied it, of course. Denied the forged letter, denied the ledgers, denied the half-drafted petition, insisting it was all misunderstanding twisted by a governess overstepping her station and a girl too unstable to be believed. And for one terrible night, it seemed to work. The Duke, shaken and uncertain, retreated into the same paralysis that had crippled him for 7 years. "I need time," he told Whitmore the next morning, unable to meet her eyes. "Pembroke has managed this family's affairs since my wife died. I cannot simply." "He forged a letter to make your daughter believe she killed her mother," Whitmore said, sharper than she had ever allowed herself to speak to him. "While systematically stealing from the estate meant to be her inheritance. How much more time does he need, Your Grace, before there's nothing left to protect?" The Duke had no answer. Grief, Whitmore was beginning to understand, could hollow a man so completely that even his own daughter's suffering became something he simply didn't have room left to see. Pembroke, sensing the opening, moved quickly. By that evening, word came to Whitmore through a tight-lipped Clara that her dismissal was being arranged, quietly, without confrontation, a generous severance offered in exchange for her immediate and permanent departure from Ashford Hall. "He's convinced the Duke it's for the best," Clara said, wringing her hands. "That your presence is only agitating Lady Seraphina further. That the accusations were exaggerated by a woman looking to make herself indispensable." It was, Whitmore thought grimly, a very good lie. Good enough that for one long, cold hour, sitting alone in her room with her trunk half-packed, she genuinely believed she might lose. Then Seraphina came to her, not the cold, cutting young woman who had greeted her on the staircase weeks before, but someone rawer, and infinitely braver. "You're not leaving," Seraphina said, standing in the doorway with her chin lifted despite the tremor in her voice. "I won't allow it. It isn't your choice to make, Seraphina. It's your father's house. Then I'll make it my father's choice to lose something, if he lets this happen." Seraphina stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I've spent my whole life letting people decide things for me because I was too frightened, or too guilty, or too convinced I deserved whatever misery came my way. You were the only person who ever told me no and meant something kind by it. I am not going to stand here and say nothing while he does to you what he's been doing to me for years." Together, they went to the Duke's study, Seraphina, Clara, and Whitmore standing before him with every scrap of evidence laid bare a second time, and this time Seraphina did the speaking. "You have spent 7 years grieving mother so completely that you forgot you had a daughter left to raise," she said, voice shaking but unbroken. "I forgive you for that, because grief is not something anyone chooses. But I will not forgive you for letting the one person who ever told me the truth be driven from this house to protect the man who lied to both of us. Choose, father. Choose now." The Duke looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, Whitmore thought, for perhaps the first time in years, and something in his face finally, fully broke open. "Fetch Pembroke," he said quietly. "And send for the magistrate." Lord Pembroke did not go quietly, but the ledgers, the letters, and the forged confession left him little room to maneuver. By month's end, the magistrate's inquiry had confirmed everything: the falsified accounts, the years of stolen rents, the counterfeit letter designed to keep a grieving girl too broken to ever look too closely. He left Ashford Hall in disgrace, his ambitions ending in a courtroom rather than an inheritance. Duke Ashford, freed at last from the lie that had cost him his daughter as surely as death had cost him his wife, began, slowly, imperfectly, to become her father again. And Seraphina, no longer feared but finally known, found herself keeping company most evenings not out of loneliness but by choice, with the one woman who had never once flinched from her. "You never did answer," she told Whitmore, one calm evening on the cliff path, "how long you intended to stay." Whitmore smiled. "For as long as you'll have me." "What would you have done in her place?"